Good evening, everyone. Today we are going to do Pope Leo the 13th's 135-year-old documents, Encyclical Rerum Novarum, which is about civil rights and civil responsibilities for everyday people within it, the first industrial revolution. So let's go ahead and read, shall we? It's a long one, so buckle up. So we'll try to breeze through the here pretty quickly. So share screen. All right, there we go. Rerum Novarum is the encyclical by Pope Leo the 13th on capital and labor. To our venerable brethren, the patriarchs, the primates, the archbishops, the bishops, and other ordinaries, and of places having peace and communion with the apostolic see. The rights and duties of the capital and labor. The spirit of revolutionary change, which has been long been disturbing the nations of the world, should have passed beyond the sphere of politics and made its influence felt in the cognate sphere of practical economics. It is not surprising. The elements of the conflict is now raging and are unmistakable in the vast expansion of the industrial pursuits and marvelous discoveries of science. In the changes in between the masters and the workmen, and the enormous fortunes of some few individuals and utter poverty of the masses, the increased self reliance and closer mutual combination of the working classes are as also, finally, in the prevailing moral degeneracy. The momentous gravity of the state of the things now obtaining fills every mind with painful apprehension. Wise men are discussing it, and the practical men are prosing schemes, popular meetings, legislatures, and ruling the nations are all busied with it. Actually, there is no question which has taken deeper hold on the public mind. So, therefore, venerable brethren, as a former occasion which it seems opportune to refute the false teachings, we have addressed you in the interests of the church and of the common well, and have issued letters bearing on the political power, human liberty, and Christian constitution of the state, and like matters. So have we thought it expedient now to speak on the conditions of the working classes. It is subjects on which we have already touched more than once. Incidentally, but in the present letter, the responsibility of the apostolic office urges us to treat the question of the set purpose and in detail, in order that no misapprehension may exist as the principles which truth and justice dictate for its settlement. The discussion is not easy, nor to avoid of danger. It is no easy matter to define the relative rights and the mutual duties of the rich and the poor, and the capital and the labor. And the dangers lies in this, that crafty agitators are intent on making use of these differences of opinion to pervert man's judgments and stir up the people to revolt. In any case, we are clearly see that on this and there in general agreements, that some opportune remedy must be found quickly for the misery and the wretchedness pressing so unjustly on the majority of the working class, for the ancient workingmen's guilds were abolished in the last century, and no other protective organization took their place. Public institutions and the laws set aside the ancient religion. Hence, by the decrees, it has come to pass that the working men have been surrendered, isolated, and helpless to the hard-heartedness of the employers and the greed of unchecked competition. The mischief has been increased by the rapacious usury, which, although more than once condemned by the church, is nevertheless under the different guise, but with like injustice still practiced by the covetous and the grasping men. To this, men must be added that the hiring of labor and the conduct of the trade are concentrated in the hands of the comparatively few, so that the small number of the very rich men have been able to lay upon the teeming masses of the laboring poor of the yoke little better than that of slavery itself. So, number four, to remedy these wrongs, the socialists, working on the poor man's envy of the rich, are striving to do away with private property and contend with the individual possession should become the common property of all to be administered by the state or by the municipal bodies. They hold that by thus transferring property from private individuals to the community, the present mischievous state of the things will be set to rights, in as much as the citizen will then get his fair share of whatever there is to enjoy. But their contentions are so clearly powerless to end the controversy that they carried into effect. The working man himself would be amongst the first to suffer. They are, moreover, empathetically unjust, and for they would rob the lawful predecessor, distort the functions of the state, and create utter confusion in the community. It is surely undeniable that when a man engages in ill, uh, in remunerative labor, in impelling reason, the motive of his work is to obtain property and therefore to hold on to his very own. If one man hires out another his skill or his strength, he does so that the purpose of receiving in the return what is necessary for the satisfaction of his needs. He therefore expressly intends to acquire the right, full and real, not only to a remuneration, but also the disposal of such remuneration, just as he pleases. Thus, if he lives sparingly, saves money for the greater security, invests his savings in such case is the only and his wages under another form, and consequently a working man's little estate thus purchased should be as completely at his full disposal, and as are the wages as he receives in his labor. But it's precisely in such power of disposal that the ownership obtains, whether the property consists of the land or the chattels. Socialists, therefore, by endeavoring to transfer the possessions of the individuals of the community at large, the strike at the interests of every wage earner should, since would deprive him of the liberty of disposing of his wages, and thereby of all hopes of possibility of increasing his resources and bettering his condition in life. What is a far greater moment, however, is the fact that the remedy they propose manifestly against justice, for every man has by nature the right to possess the property as his own. This is one of the chief points of the distinction between man and the animal creation. For the brute has no power of self direction, but it is governed by the two main instincts, which keep his powers on alert, impel him to develop them in a fitting manner, and to stimulate and determine him in action without any power of choice. One of these instincts is self preservation, the other is propagation of the species. Both can obtain their purpose by means of things which lie within range, and beyond their verge the brute creation cannot go, for they are moved to action by their senses only, in the special direction which these suggest. But with man, it is wholly different. He possesses, on one hand, the full perfection of the animal being, and hence enjoys at least as much as the rest of animal kind the fruition of the things material. But the animal nature, however perfect, is far from representing the human being in its completeness. And in truth, but humanity's humble handmaid, made to serve and to obey, it is the mind or reason, which is the predominant element in us who are human creatures. In it renders the human uh, being human and distinguishes him essentially from the brutes. And on his very accounts, the man alone among the animal creation is endowed with reason. It must be within his right to possess things, not merely for the temporary or monumental use, as other living things do, but to have and to hold them in a stable and permanent possession. And he must not only have things that perish in use, but those also which, though they are have been reduced into use, continue for no further use after that time. Number seven. This becomes still more clearly evident if a man's nature be considered a little more deep. For man, fathoming by his faculty of use matters without number, linking the future with the present, and being the master of his own acts, guides his ways under the eternal law and the power of God, which the providence governs all. Wherefore, it is in his power to exercise his choice not only as the matters that regard his present welfare, but also to those which he deem may be his advantage in the time yet to come. Hence, man not only should possess the fruits of the earth, but also the very soil, inasmuch as from the produce of the earth he has to lay by the provision for the future. Man's needs do not die out, but forever reoccur. Although satisfied today, they demand fresh supplies for tomorrow. Nature, according, must have given a man a source that is stable, remaining always in with him, from which he might look to draw continual supplies, and his stable condition of things he finds solely in the earth and its fruits. There is no need to bring in the state. Man precedes the state and possesses, prior to the formation of any state, the right of providing for the substance of his body. In fact, that God has given the earth for the use and the enjoyment of the whole human race in no way be bar to owning the private property. For God has granted the earth to mankind in general, not in the sense that all without distinction can deal with it uh, as they like, but rather they no part of it must assign to any one in particular, and that the limits of the private possession have been left to be fixed by man's own industry and by the laws of individual races. Moreover, the earth, even though apportioning among private owners, ceases not thereby to minister to the needs of all, insomuch as there is not one who does not sustain life from what the land he produces, from the land produces. Those who do not possess the soil contribute their labor. Hence, it may truly be said that all human subsistence uh, is derived either from labor or one's own land, or from some toil, some calling, which is paid for either in the produce of the land itself or in that which is exchanged for what the land brings forth. Here again, we have further proof that the private ownership is in accordance with the law of nature, truly that which is required for the preservation of life and the life's well being. It is produced in the great abundance from the soil, but not until man has brought it into cultivation and extended upon it in its solicitude and skill. Now, when man thus turns the activity of his mind and the strength of his body toward procuring the fruits of the nature, by such an act, he makes his own the portion of the nature fields which he cultivates, and the portion on which he leaves, as it were, the impress of his personality. And it cannot be just that he should possess the portion as his very own and have a right to hold it without anyone being justified in violating that right. So strong and convincing are these arguments that it seems amazing that some should now be setting up anew certain obsolete opinions in opposition to what are here laid down. They assert that the right for private persons to have the use of soil and various fruitations, but that is and the unjust for any one possession outright, either in the land on which he had built or the estate in which he has brought under cultivation. But those who deny these rights do not perceive that they are defrauding man of what his own labors has produced. For the soil which is tilled and cultivated with the toil and the skill utterly changes the condition. It was the wild before, and now it is fruitful, was barren, but now brings forth in abundance. That which has thus altered and improved the land becomes so truly part of itself as to the great measure indistinguishable and inseparable from it. It is just that the fruit of a man's own sweat and labor should be possessed and enjoyed by any man, anyone else. As effect follows their cause, So it is just and right that the results of a labor should belong to those who have bestowed their labor. Hardcore right there. That is abundantly correct. With reason that the common opinion of mankind, little affected by the few dissidents who have contended for the opposite view, has found that the careful study of the nature and the laws of nature and the foundations of the divisions of property and the practice of all ages has consecrated the principles of private ownership as being preeminently in conformity with the human race and as conducing in the most unmistakable manner to the peace and the tranquility of the human existence. The same principle is confirmed and enforced by the civil laws which, so long as they were just, derived from the laws of nature, their binding force. The authority of the divine law adds this sanction, forbidding us to the severest terms, even to covet that which is in others. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor house, nor his field, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything of his. Pretty clear. Number 12. The rights here spoken belong to each man and to each individual man are seen in much stronger light when considered in the relation to man's social and domestic obligations. In choosing a state of life, it is to uh, dispute it is indisputable that all that are fully at liberty to follow the counsel of Jesus Christ, as observing the virginity or to bind themselves by the marriage tie, no human law can abolish the natural or original right of marriage, nor in any way limit the chief and principal purpose of marriage ordained by God's authority from the beginning, increase and multiply. Here we have the family, the society of man's house, a society very small, one must admit, but none the less a true society, and one older than any state, and consequently it has rights and the duties, in particular to itself, which are quite independent of the state. That right to property, therefore, which has been proved to belong naturally to individual persons, must in like wise belong to a man in his captivity, of the head of the family, nay, that the all the stronger in proportion as the human person receives a wider extension in the family group. It is a most sacred law of nature that a father should provide food and all necessities for those whom he has begotten, and similarly, it is natural that he should wish for his children who carry on, so to speak, and continue his personality, should be by him provided with all the needful to enable them to keep themselves decently from the want and misery amidst the uncertainties of the mortal life. Now, in no other way can a father effect this except by ownership of productive property, which he can transmit his children by inheritance. No a family, nevertheless, has a state, is, as he have said, as we have said, a true society, governed by the authority particular to itself, is to say that by the authority of the Father, provided therefore the limits which are prescribed by the very purposes which it exists be not transgressed. The family has the least equal rights, and with the state in the choice and the pursuit of the things needful to the preservation and its just liberty. We say at least equal rights, for inasmuch as the domestic households is an antecedent, as well in the idea as in fact to the gathering of men into they have the rights and duties which are prior to the duty and founded more immediately in nature. If the families, on entering into association or fellowship, were to experience hindrance in a commonwealth instead of help, and were to find their rights attacked instead of being upheld, would be rightly be object in detestation rather than of desire. Number 14. The contention then that civil government should, as at the option, intrude into the exercise intimate control over the family and the household is a great and pernicious error. True, if a family finds itself in the exceeding distress, utterly deprived of the counsel of friends, and without any prospects of uh, exonerating itself, it is the right that the extreme necessity be met by public aid, since each family is a part of the commonwealth in like manner. If within the precincts of the household there occur grave disturbance, mutual rights, public authority should intervene to force each party to yield to other its proper due, for it is not to deprive citizens of their rights, but justly and properly to safeguard and strengthen them. But the rulers of the Commonwealth must go no further here. Nature bids them stop. Paternal authority can be neither abolished nor absorbed by the states, for it has the same source as human life itself. The child belongs to the father, and it is, as it were, the continuation of the father's personality. And speaking strictly, the children takes its place in civil society, not on its own rights, but in its quality as a member of the family in which it was born, and for the very reason that the child belongs to the father. It is, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, quotes, before it attains the use of free will under the power and the charge of its parents. The socialists, or unquotes, uh, the socialists, therefore, in the setting aside the parent and the setting up the state supervision, act against the natural justice and destroys the structure of the home. Laying down the law here. I like it a lot. In addition to the injustice, it is only too evident what is upset and disturbance there would be in all classes, and how to intolerable and hateful a slavery citizens would be subjected. The door would be thrown open to envy, to mutual infective, and to discord, and the sources of wealth themselves would run dry, and for no one would have any interest in exerting his talents or his industry, and the ideal equality about which they entertained pleasant dreams would be in reality the leveling down of all to a like condition of misery and denigration. Hence, it is clear that the main tenet of socialism, community of goods, must be utterly rejected, since it only injures those whom it would seem meant to benefit, is directly contrary to the natural rights of mankind, and would introduce confusion and disorder into the commonwealth. First and most fundamentally, principle, therefore, if one would undertake and alleviate the condition of the masses, must be the inviolable the inviolability of the private property. This being established, we proceed to show where the remedy sought for uh, must be found. Number 16. We approach the subject with the confidence and exercise on the rights on which the manifestly appertain to us, for no particular solution of this question will be found apart from the intervention of religion and of the church. It is we who are the chief guardian of religion and the chief dispenser what pertains to the church. And by keeping silence, we would seem to neglect the duty incumbent on us. Doubtless, this most serious question demands the attention and the efforts of others besides ourselves, to wit, and the rulers of states, of the employers, of the labor, of the wealthy, of the working classes themselves, for which we are pleading. But we affirm without hesitation that all the striving of men would be in vain if they leave out the church. It is the church that insists on authority of the gospel upon those teachings whereby the conflict can be brought to an end, or rendered at least far less bitter. The church uses her efforts not only to enlighten the mind, but to direct by her precepts the life and the conduct of each and all. The church improves and betters the condition of the working man by the means of numerous organizations, does her best to enlist the services of all classes, and discusses and endeavoring further in the most practical way the interests of the working classes, and considers that for this purpose a recourse should be had in due measure and degree, and to the intervention of the law and of the state authority. Number 17. It must be first of all recognized that the condition of the things inherent in the human affairs must be borne with, for all it is impossible to reduce civil society to one dead level. Socialists may have the intent to do their utmost, but all striving against nature is in vain. There naturally exists amongst mankind manifold differences of the most important kind. People differ in capacity, skill, health, strength, and unequal fortune is necessary result of the unequal condition. Such unequality is far from being disadvantageous either to individuals or to the community. Society and the public life can only be maintained by means of various kinds of capacities for business and playing of many parts. Each man, as a rule, chooses the part which suits his own particular domestic condition. As regards bodily labor, even had man ever never fallen from the state of innocence, he would have he would not have remained wholly idle, but that which he would have been uh, his free choice and his delight become afterwardly compulsory, and the painful expiation for his disobedience. Cursed be the earth in thy work and thy labor, thou shalt eat of all the days of thy life. So, number 18. In like manner, the other pains and hardships of life will have no end or cessation on earth, for the consequences of sin is bitter and hard to bear, and they must accompany men as long as life lasts, to suffer and to endure. Therefore, it is the lot of humanity them that let them strive as they may, no man and no artifice will ever succeed in banishing from human life the ills and the troubles which beset it. If any there are who pretend differently, who hold out that the hard pressed people are boon of freedom from pain and trouble, and from the undisturbed repose and constant enjoyments. They delude the people and impose upon them, and their lying promises will one day, will only one day bring forth evils worse than the present. Nothing is more useful than to look upon the world as it really is, and at the same time to seek elsewhere, as we have said, for the solace to its troubles. The great mistake made in regard to the matter uh, under the consideration is to take up the notion that the class is naturally hostile to class, and that the wealthy and the working men are intended by the nature to live in mutual conflicts. So irrational and so false is this view that the is directly contrary to the truth. Just as the symmetry of the human frame is the result of the suitable arrangement of the different parts of the body, so in the state is ordained by the nature that these two classes should dwell in harmony and agreement, so as to maintain the balance of the body politic. Each needs the other. Capital cannot do without labor, nor labor without capital. Mutual agreement results of good order, while the perpetual conflict necessarily produces confusion and savage barbarism. Now, in preventing such strife as this and uprooting it, the efficacy of the Christian institutions is marvelous and manifold. First of all, there is no intermediary more powerful than religion, whereof the church is the interpreter and guardian, in drawing the rich and the working class together by reminding each of its duties to another, and especially the obligations of justice, the virtue of justice. So, number 20. Of these duties, and the following bind and the proletarian and the worker fully and faithfully to perform the work which has been freely and equitably agreed upon, never to injure the property nor to outrage the person of the employer, never to resort to violence in defending their own cause, nor engage in the riots or disorder, and to have nothing to do with men or of evil principles, who work upon the people and are full of purposes of great results, and excite the foolish hopes which are usually end in useless regrets and grievous loss. The following duties bind the wealthy owner and the employer: not to look upon their work people as bondsmen, but to respect in every man his dignity as a person, ennobled by Christian character. They are reminded that, according to the natural reason of the Christian philosophy, working for gain is credible, not shameful, to a man, since it enables him to earn an honorable livelihood. But to misuse men as though they were the things in the pursuit of gain, or to value them solely for their physical powers, that is truly the shameful and inhuman. Again, justice demands that in dealing with the working man, religion and a good his soul must be kept in mind. Hence, the employer is bound to see that the worker has time for his religious duties. Amen to that, and that he should not be exposed to the corrupting influences and the dangers of the occasions, and that he should not be led away to neglect his home and family. Amen to that too. and or to squander his earnings. Furthermore, the employer must never tax his work people beyond their strength, or to employ in work unsuited to their sex and age. His great and principal duty is to give every one what is just, doubtless, before deciding whether wages acts fair. Many things have to be considered, but the wealthy owners and all the masters of labor should be mindful of this, that to exercise the pressure upon the indigent and the destitute for the sake of gain, and gather one's profit out of the need of another, is condemned by all laws, human and divine, to defraud any man or to defraud anyone of wages that are his due is the great crime which cries to the avenging anger of heaven. And behold, the hires of the laborers, which by fraud has been kept back by you, crieth and cries to them, hath the ears of the Lord of the Sabbath. Lastly, the rich man must religiously refrain from cutting down the workman's earnings, whether by force or by fraud, or by usurious dealings, which all the greater reason, because the laboring man is, as a rule, weak and unprotected, because his slender means should, in proportion to their scantiness, be accounted sacred. Were these precepts carefully obeyed and followed out, would they not be sufficient of themselves to keep under all the strife and all its causes? 21. But the church, with Jesus Christ as her master and guide, aims higher still. She lays down precepts yet more perfect and tries to bind class to class in friendliness and good feelings. And the things of the earth cannot be understood or valued aright without taking into consideration the life to come, the life that will know in the life, the life that will know no death. Exclude the idea of frutility, and forthwith the very notion of which is good and right would perish. Nay, the whole scheme of the universe would become dark and unfathomable mystery. The great truth which we learn from the nature herself is also the grand Christian dogma on which the religion rests on as its foundation. That when we have given up this present life, then shall we begin to live. God has not created us for the perishable and transitory things of the earth, but for the things heavenly and everlasting. And He has given us this world as a place of exile and not for our abiding place, as for the riches and other things which men call good and desirable, whether we have them in abundance or are lacking in them, so far as eternal happiness is concerned, it makes no difference. The only important thing is to use them right, to use them aright. Jesus Christ, when He redeemed us with the plentiful redemption, took not away the pains and the sorrows, in which such large proportion are woven together in the web of our mortal life. He transformed them to the motives of the virtue and the occasions of the merits. And no man can hope for the eternal reward unless he follow the blood-stained footsteps of his Savior. Quote, if we suffer with him, we shall also reign with him. Unquote. Christ's labors are suffering. and accepted of his own free will, have marvelously sweetened all suffering and all labor. And not only his example, but by his grace and by the hope held forth of everlasting recompense, has made pain and grief more easy to endure, for which is at present momentary, and light on our tribulation, worketh for us above the measure and exceedingly an eternal weight of glory. Can't escape pain. It's just the way it's going to be. Therefore, those whom fortune favors are warned that the riches do not bring freedom from sorrow, and are no avail for eternal happiness, but rather are obstacles. And the rich should tremble at the threatenings of Jesus Christ, threatenings so unwonted in the mouth of our Lord, that the most strict account must be given to the supreme judge for all we possess. The chief and the most excellent rule for the right use of money is the most heathen philosophers hinted at, but which the church has traced out clearly, and has not only made known to men's minds, but has impressed upon their lives. It rests on the principle that if one thing to have the right possession of money, and another to have the right to use money as one wills, private ownership, as we have seen, is the natural right of man, and the exercise that man, especially as members of society, is not only lawful but absolutely necessary. It is the lawful, says St. Thomas Aquinas, quote, for a man to hold private property is also necessary for carrying on of the human existence, unquote. But if the question be asked, how must one's possessions be used? The church replies without hesitation in the words of the same holy doctor, quote, man should not consider his material possessions as his own, but as common to all, so as to share them without hesitation when others are in need. Hence the apostle with the command to the uh, rich of this world to offer with no stint, to apportion largely. Quote, true, no one is commanded to distribute to others that which is required for his own needs and those of his own household, nor even to give away what is reasonable required to keep up becoming his condition in life. For no one ought to live other than becomingly. But when that was necessary demands has been supplied, one standing fairly taken thought for, it becomes a duty to give to the indigent and out of the remains over. Of what then remaineth, give alms. It is a duty not of justice, save in extreme cases, but of Christian charity, but a duty enforced by human law. But the laws and the judgments of men must yield place to the laws and the judgments of Christ, the true God, who in many ways urges his uh, followers the practice of almsgiving. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Who will count the kindness of done or refused to the poor as done or refused to himself? As long as you did it to one of my least of my brethren, you did it to me. To sum up, then, what we have been said, moreover, we have received from the divine bounty a large share of temporal blessings, whether they be external or immaterial, or the gifts of the mind, has received them in the purposes use them for the perfecting of his own nature, and at the same time they may employ them as a steward of God's providence for the benefit of others. He that hath the talent, said St. Gregory the Great, quote, let him see that he hide it not. And he that hath abundance, let him quicken himself to mercy and generosity. That he hath uh, the art and skill, let him do his best to share the use and the utility hereby with the neighbor. As for those who possess not the gifts of fortune, they are taught by the church that God's sight poverty is no disgrace, and that there's nothing to be ashamed of their earnings and their bread by labor. This is enforced by what we see in Christ Himself, who, whereas He who was rich for our sakes became poor, and He and who, being the Son of God and God Himself, chose to seem and to be considered the son of a carpenter, nay, did not disdain to spend the great part of his life as a carpenter himself. Quote, is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary? Unquote. For the contemplation of the divine model, it is more easy to understand that the true worth and nobility of a man lie in his moral equalities, that is, in virtue. That virtue is, moreover, the common inheritance of men, equally within the reach of the high and low, the rich and the poor, and that in virtue, and virtue alone. Wherever found, will be followed by the rewards of everlasting happiness. Nay, God Himself seems to incline rather to those who suffer misfortune, for Jesus Christ calls the poor blessed. He lovingly invites those in labor and grief to come to Him for solace, and He displays the tenderest charity toward the lowly and oppresses these reflections cannot fail to keep down the pride of the well to do and to give heart to the unfortunate and to move the former to the generate and the latter to be moderate in their desires. Thus the separation which pride would be set up tends to disappear, nor will it be difficult to make rich and poor join hands in friendly concord. But if, but if Christian precepts prevail, the respective classes will only be united in the bonds of friendship, but also in those brotherly love. For they will understand and feel that men are children of the same common Father, who is God, and that all have alike the same last end, which is God Himself, who alone can make either men or angels absolutely and perfectly happy, and that each and all are redeemed and are made sons of God by Jesus Christ, the firstborn among many brethren. And the blessing of nature and the gifts of grace belong to the whole human race in the common, and that from the none except the unworthy is withheld the inheritance of the kingdom of heaven, and the son's heirs also heirs indeed of God, and co heirs with Christ. Such is the scheme of duties and of rights which is shown forth to the world by the gospel. Would it not seem that with a society penetrated with the ideas like these, strife must quickly cease? But the church, not content with the pointing out the remedy, also applies it. For the church does her utmost to teach and to train men and to educate them, and by the intermediary of her bishops and clergy, diffuses her solitary teachings far and wide. She strives to influence the mind and the heart so that all may willingly yield themselves to be formed and guided by the commandments of God. It is precisely in this fundamental and momentous matter on which everything depends that the church possesses the power, particularly on her own, and the instruments which she employs are given to her by Jesus Christ himself. For the very purpose of reaching the hearts of men and drive their efficiency from God, they alone can reach the innermost heart and conscience and bring men to act from the motive of duty, to control their passions and appetites, to love God and their fellow men with the love that is outstanding of the highest degree, and to break down courageously every barrier which blocks the way to virtue. That's so good. Man, that is fantastic. On this subject, we need but recall for one moment the examples of recorded in history. Of these facts, there cannot be any shadow of a doubt, for instance, that the civil society was renovated in every part of the Christian institutions, that in the strength of the renewal of the human race was lifted up and better things, nay, that this brought back from death to life, and that so excellent a life that nothing more perfect had been known before, nor will be known in the ages that have yet to be. Of this beneficent transformation, Jesus Christ was at once the first cause and the final end. As from him all came, so to him was all to be brought back. For when the human race, by the light of the gospel message, came to be known the grand mystery of the incarnation of the Word and the redemption of man, at once the life of Jesus Christ, God and man, pervaded every race and nation, and penetrated them with his faith and his precepts and his laws. And if human society is to be healed now, in no other way can it be healed save by the return to Christian life and Christian institutions. When the society is perishing, the wholesome advice to give to those who would restore it is to call it to the principles from which it sprang. For the purpose and the perfection of the association is to aim at and to attain that which is formed, and the efforts should be put in motion, inspired by the end and the object which originally gave it being, and hence to fall away from the primal constitution implies disease, to go back to it recovery. And this may be asserted with the utmost truth both of the whole body and of the commonwealth and of that of the class of its citizens. By far the great majority who get their living by their labor. Neither must be the presupposed as the solicitude of the church is to be preoccupied with the spiritual concerns of her children, as to neglect their temporal and earthly interests. Her desires as the poor, for example, should raise above poverty and the wretchedness, and the betterment their condition in life. For this is makes her a strong endeavor by the facts that she calls men to virtue, forms them to practice. She promotes this in no slight degree. Christian morality, where when adequately and completely practiced, leads itself to temporal. temporal prosperity, for it merits the blessings that of God, who is the source of all blessings, is powerfully restrains the greed of possession and the thirst for the pleasure twin plagues, which too often makes a man who is void of self restraint miserable in the midst of abundance, makes men supply for the lack of means through the economy, teaching them to be content with their frugal living, and further keeping them out of reach of those vices which devour not small incomes merely, but large fortunes, and dissipates many in goodly inheritance. Man, that's powerful. That's mm, that's powerful. Uh, the church, moreover, intervenes directly in behalf of the poor by the setting on foot and maintaining many associations which she knows to be um, efficient for the relief of poverty. Herein, again, she has always succeeded, so that well as we have been even exhorted the praise of her enemies. Such was the order of brotherly love amongst the earliest Christians, that the number of those that were in the better circumstances to spoil themselves of their possessions in order to relieve their brethren, whence quotes, neither was there any needy among them, unquote, to the order of the deacons, instituted in the very instance, was committed by the apostles in charge of the daily doses, and the apostle Paul, though burdened with the solicitude of all the churches, hesitated not to undertake laborious journeys in order to carry the alms of the faithful to the poorest Christians. Tertullian calls these contributions given voluntarily by the Christians in their assemblies deposits of piety, because to cite in his own words, they were employed, quote, in feeding the needy, in burying them, in the support of the youths and the maidens destitute of means, and derived of their own parents, or deprived of their parents, in the care of the aged, and the relief of the shipwrecked. Unquote. Man, this just keeps getting more and more little juicy. Thus, by the decree came into the existence of the patrimony which the church has guarded with the religious care as the inheritance of the poor, nay, in order to spare them of the shame of begging. The church has provided the aid for the needy. The common mother of the rich and the poor has aroused everywhere the heroism of charity, and established the congregations of the religious and many other useful institutions for help and mercy, so that hardly any kind of suffering could exist which was not afforded relief. At the present day, many there are who, like the heathen of old, seek to blame and condemn the church for such enmity, for such eminent charity. They would substitute it instead a system of relief organized by the state. But no human expedients will ever make up for the devoutness of the self sacrifice of a Christian charity. Charity as a virtue pertains to the church, for the virtue is not, unless to be drawn from the most sacred heart of Jesus Christ. Whoever turns his back on the church cannot be near Christ, cannot be near to Christ. It cannot, however, be doubted that to obtain the purpose we are treating of, not only the church, but all human agencies must occur. All who are concerned in the matter should be of one mind, and according to their ability act together. It is with this, as the providence that governs the world, the results of the causes do not actually take place, saves where all the causes cooperate. It is sufficient, therefore, to inquire what part of the state should play in the work of the remedy itself. By the state, we understand not the particular form of the government prevailing in this or that nation, but the state as rightly apprehended, that is to say, any government comfortable in the institutions to the right reason and the natural law, and to those dedicate to the divine wisdom, which we have expounded in the encyclical on the Christian constitution of the state. And the foremost duty, therefore, of the rulers of the state should be to make sure that the laws and institutions, the general character, the administration of the Commonwealth, shall be as themselves to realize public well being and the private property. This is the proper scope of the wise statesman and the work of the rulers. Now, as state chiefly prospers and thrives through the moral rule, well regulated family life, respect for religion and justice, and the moderation and the fairly imposed public taxes, that's a big one, the progress of the arts and of the trade, and the abundance yields of the land through everything, in fact, which makes the citizens better and happier. Hereby, then, it lies the power of the ruler to benefit every class in the state, amongst the rest, to the promotes the utmost in the interest of the poor, and in the virtue of his office, and without being open to the suspicion of undue interference, since it is the province of the Commonwealth to serve the common good, and the more that is done for the benefit of the working classes by the general laws of the country, the less need there will be to seek special means to relieve them. There is another deeper consideration which must not be lost sight of. As regard the state, the interests of all, whether high or low, are equal. The members of the working classes are citizens by nature, and by the same right as the rich, they are real parts. The living the life which makes up, through the family, the body of the Commonwealth, and it is need hardly to be said that they are in every city very largely or in the majority. It would be irrational to neglect one portion of the citizens in favor of another. Therefore, the public administration must duly and solicitously provide for the welfare of the common or for the comfort of the working classes. Otherwise, the law of justice will be violated, with uh, which ordains that each man shall have his due. The cite to cite the wise words of St. Thomas Aquinas, quote, as the part of the whole are in a certain sense identical, so that belongs to the whole in a sense belongs to the parts. Amongst many and the grave duties of the rulers who would have to do their best for the people, the first and the chief is to act with strict justice, and with the justice which is called distributive toward each and every class alike. But although also can and ought to contribute to the common good in which the individuals share advantageously to themselves, yet it should not be supposed that all can contribute in like way. and to some extent, no matter the changes may occur in the forms of the government, there will never be differences in inequalities of the conditions of the state. Society cannot exist or uh, a be conceived of without them. There must be who devote themselves to the work of the commonwealth, who make the laws or administer justice, or those who advise and the authority govern the nation in times of peace and defend it in war. Such men clearly occupy the foremost place in the states and should be held in the highest estimation, for their work concerns most nearly and effectively the general interests of the community. Those who labor at the trade of the calling do not promote the general welfare in such a measure as this, but they benefit the nation. If less directly, in the most important manner, we have insisted, it is true, that since the end of society is to make men better, the chief good that men can possess is virtue. Nevertheless, it is the business of a well constituted body politic to see the provision of those material and external helps that the use of which is necessary to a virtuous action. Now, for the provision of such commodities, the labor of the working class and their skill and the employment of their strength and the cultivation of the land and the work steps of trade, it is especially responsible and quite indispensable. Indeed, the cooperation is in respect so important that he may truly be said that it is only by the labor of working men that the states grow rich. Justice, therefore, demands that the interests of the working classes should be carefully watched over by the administration so that they who contribute so largely to advantageous the advantage of the community may themselves share in the benefits which they create, that being housed, clothed, and bodily fit, they may they may find their life less hard and more endurable. And it follows that whatever shall appear to prove the conductive to the well-being of those who work should obtain favorable consideration. There is no fear that solicitude of this kind will be harmful to any interest. On the contrary, it would be the advantage of all, for it cannot be uh, good for the Commonwealth to shield from misery those on whom it so largely depends for the things that it needs. Number 35. We have said that the state must not absorb the individual of or the family. Both should be allowed free and to be untrammeled action so far as is consistent with the common good and the interest of others. Rulers should nevertheless anxiously safeguard the community and all its members, and the community because the conversation thereof is so emphatically the business uh, of the supreme power, but the safety of the commonwealth is not only the first law, but it is the governor's whole reason of existence, the government's whole reason for existence, and the members, because both philosophy and the gospel concur in laying down the object of the government of the state should be not the advantage of the ruler, but the benefit of those over whom he has placed, as the power to rule comes from God and is, as it were, a per, participation in his the highest of all sovereignties. It should be exercised as the power of God is exercised, with a fatherly solicitude, which not only guides the whole, but reaches also the individuals. Whenever the general interest or a particular class suffers or threaten them with harm, which can in no other way be met or prevented, the public authority must step in to deal with it. Now it is in the interest of the community as well as the individual that the peace and the good order should be maintained, that all things should be carried uh, on in accordance with God's laws and those in nature, and the discipline of the family life should be observed, and that religion should be obeyed, for the high standard of the morality should prevail, both in public and in private life. The justice should be held sacred, and that no one should injure another with impunity, and that the members of the Commonwealth should be grown up in man's estate, strong and robust and capable, if need be, of guarding and defending their country, if by a strike of workers or the concerted interruption of work, there should be an imminent danger of disturbance to the public peace, or the circumstances were such that amongst the working classes the ties of family life were relaxed. If religion were found to be suffer through the workers not having time or the opportunity afforded to them to practice its duties, if in workshops or factories there were in danger to the morals through the mixing of the sexes and from other harmful occasions of evil, or if the employers lay burdens upon the workmen which were unjust, or denigrated them with conditions repugnant to their condition as human beings. Finally, if health were endangered by the excesses of labor, or by the work unsuited to sex or age. In such cases, there can be no question that, in certain limits, it would be right to invoke the aid and the authority of law. The limits must be determined by the nature of the occasion, which calls for the law's interference, and the principle being that the law must not undertake more nor proceed further than is required for the remedy of evil or the removal of mischief. Rights must be religiously respected wherever they exist, and it is the duty of the public authority to prevent and to punish injury, uh, and to protect everyone in the profession of his own. Still, when there is a question of defending the rights of the individuals, the poor and the badly off have the claim to the a special consideration. The richer class have many ways of shielding themselves and to stand less in the need of the help from the state, wherein the mass of the poor have no resources of their own to fall back upon and must chiefly depend upon the assistance of the state. And it is for this reason that the wages earners, since they mostly belong in the mass of the needy, should be especially cared for and protected by the governments. Here, however, it is expedient to bring under the special notice certain matters of the moment. First of all, there is in the duty of the safeguarding the private property by the legal enactment and protection. Most of all, it is essential where the passion of the greed is so strong to keep the populace
within the line of duty, if it may justly strive for a better condition, neither justice nor the common good allows any individual to seize upon that which belongs to another, or under the futile or shallow pretext of equality, to lay violent hands on another person's possessions. Most true it is by far the larger part of the workers prefer to better themselves by honest labor rather than by doing it any wrong to others. But there are not a few who are imbued with evil principles and eager for revolutionary change, whose main purpose it is to stir up disorder and incite their followers to enact or to acts of violence. The authority of the law should intervene to put restraint upon such firebrands, to save the working classes from being led astray by the maneuvers, and to protect lawful owners from spoliation. When work people have recourse to strike and become voluntarily idle, it is frequently because the hours of labor are too long, or the work too hard, or because they consider their wages insufficient. The grave inconvenience of this not uncommon occurrence should be uh, alleviated by public remedial measures. For such a paralyzing of the labor not only affects the masters and their work people alike, but it is extremely injurious to the trade and to the general interests of the public. Moreover, such occasions, violence and disorder are generally not far distant, and thus in frequency happens that the public peace is imperiled. The laws should forestall and prevent such troubles from arising. They should lend their influence and authority to the removal in a good time of the causes which lead to the conflicts between the employers and the employed. The working man, too, has the interests in which he should be protected by the state. And first of all, there are the interests of his soul. Life on earth, however good and desirable it is itself, is not the final purpose for which man is created. It is the way and the means that is to attain the attainment of the truth and the love of the goodness in which is the full life of the soul consists. It is the soul which is made after the image and likeness of God. It is a soul that is the sovereignty resides in the virtue there, whereof a man is commanded to rule the creatures below him, and to use all the earth and the ocean for his profit and advantage. Fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fishes of the sea and the fowls of the air, and the living creatures that move upon it. In this respect, all men are equal. There is here no difference between rich and poor, master and servant, ruler and ruled. Quote, for the same Lord is over all. No man may with impunity outrage the human dignity which God himself treats with great reverence, nor stand in the way of the higher life, which is the preparation of eternal life of heaven. Nay, more, no man has in this matter power over himself to consent to any treatment which is calculated to defeat the end and the purpose of his being is beyond his right. He cannot give up his soul to servitude, for it is not man's own rights which are here in question, but the rights of God, the most sacred and inviolable rights. From the follows of the obligation of the cessation from work and labor on Sundays and certain holy days, the rest from labor is not to be understood as merely giving way to idleness, much less must be the occasion for spending money and for the vicious indulgence, as many would have to be, but it should be rest from labor, hallowed by religion. Rest combined with the religious observances disposed men to forget for a while the business of everyday life, to turn his thoughts to the things heavenly, and to worship which is he so strictly owes to the eternal Godhead. In this, the overall, which is the reason, a rid motive of Sunday rest, the rest sanctioned by God's great law, the ancient covenant. Quote, remember thou, keep holy the Sabbath day, unquote, and taught that the world by his own mystery rest after the creation of man. He, quote, he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done, unquote. And if we turn now to the things external and material, the first of all to secure is to save the unfortunate and working people from the cruelty of men of greed, who use human beings as a mere instrument for money making. It is neither just nor human so as to grind men down with excessive labor as to stupefy their minds and wear out their bodies. Men's powers, like the general nature, are limited, and beyond these limits he cannot go. His strength is developed and increased by use and exercise, but only on condition of due intermission and proper rest. Daily labor, therefore, should be so regulated as not to be protracted over longer hours than the strength admits. How many and how long the intervals of rest should be must depends on the nature of the work, on the circumstances of time and place, on the health and the strength of the workmen. Those who work in the mines and the quarries extract the coal, the stone, and the metals from the bowels of the earth should have shorter hours of proportion as to their labor is more severe in trying to the health. Then again, the season of the year should be taken in account. For not unfrequently a kind of labor is easy at one time, which at another time is intolerable or exceedingly difficult. Finally, work which is quite suitable for strong men cannot rightly be required from a woman or a child. In regard to children, great care should be taken not to place them in workshops or factories until their bodies or minds be sufficiently developed. For just as they were rough, weather destroys the buds of the spring, so does too early the experience of life's hard toil plights the young promise of a child's faculties and render any true education impossible. Women, again, are not suited for certain occupations. A woman is by nature fitted for home work, and in which is best adapted at once to preserve her modesty, to promote the good bringing up of children, and the well-being of the family. And the general principle it may be laid down that the workman ought to have the leisure and the rest proportionate to the wear and tear and the strength and the waste of the strength. It must be repaired by the cessation of hard work. I hope my live stream didn't go down. Okay, awesome. Awesome. So, in all agreements between the masters and work, people, there is always a condition expressed or understood that there should be allowed proper rest for the soul and body, to agree in any other sense would be against what is right and just. For it can never be just or right to require on the one side or promise on the other, in giving up those duties which a man owes to his God and to himself. And we approach a subject of great importance, of which is in respect of which, if extremes are to be avoided, right notions are absolutely necessary. Wages are, as we are told, are regulated by free consent, and therefore the employer, when he pays what is agreed upon, has done his part, and seemingly is not called upon to do anything beyond. The only way, it is said, in which injustice must occur would be if a master refused to pay the whole wages, and if the workman uh, should not complete the work undertaken. In such cases, the public authority should intervene to see, and each obtains his due, but not under any other circumstances. In this kind of argument, a fair minded man will not easily uh, or entirely assent. It is not complete, for there are important considerations which leaves out the account altogether. To labor is to exert oneself for the sake of procuring what is necessary for the various purposes of life. The chief of all is the self preservation. Quote, in the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread. Quote, unquote. Hence, a man's labor necessarily bears two notes of character, or character. First of all, it is the personal, inasmuch as the force which acts is bound up with the personality, and the property of him who acts in, and further was given to him his advantage. Secondly, men's labor is necessary, for without the result of labor a man cannot live, and self preservation is the law of nature, which is wrong to disobey. Now, were we to consider labor merely in so much as personal, doubtless it would be with the workman's rights to accept uh, any rate of wages, whatever. So, for the same way, if uh, as as he is free to work or not, so is he free to accept the small wage or even none at all. But our conclusion must be very different. If, together with the personal element in a man's work, we must consider the fact that the work is also necessary for him to live, those two aspects of work, in thoughts, but not in reality. The preservation of life is the bounden duty of one and all, and wanting therein is a crime. If, or it is necessary, it follows that each one that has the natural right to procure and what is required in order to live, and the poor can procure that in no other way than what they can earn through their work. Letting working let the working man whoa, let the working man and the employer make free agreements, and the particular let them agree freely as to the wages. Nevertheless, there underlies a dedicate a, a, a dictate of the natural justice, more imprecious and ancient than any bargain. between man and man. Namely, the wages ought not be insufficient to support the frugal and well behaved uh, wage earner. If, though, the necessity or fear of a worse evil, the workman accept the harder conditions because an employer or contractor will afford him no better, he is made the victim of a force and injustice. In these and similar questions, however, such as, for example, the hours of labor in different trades, the sanitary precautions to be observed in factories and workshops, in order to supersede the undue interference on the part of the state, especially as the circumstances, the times, and localities differ so widely. It is inadvisable that the recourse be had to societies or the broads, such as we have shall mention presently, or to some other model of the safeguarding the interests of the wage earners, the state being appealed to should circumstances require for the sanction and the protection. If a workman's wages be sufficient to enable him comfortably to support himself, his wife, and his children, find himself he will find it easy, if he be a sensible man, to practice thrift, and he will not fail by cutting down expenses to put by the some little savings, and thus secure the modest uh, source of income. Nature itself would urge him in this. We have seen that this great labor question cannot be solved save by assuming as a principle that the private ownership must be held sacred and inviolable. The law, therefore, should favor ownership, and its policy should be induced as many as possible uh, of the people to become owners. That's super important. No 50-year mortgages, basically. That's what that's saying right there. Uh, Many excellent results will follow from this. And first of all, property will certainly become more equitably divided. For the result of civil change and the revolution has been the divide has been to divided cities into two classes, separated by the wide chasm. On the one side, there is the party which holds power because it holds wealth, which is in its grasp the whole of the labor and the trade, which manipulates for its own benefit and its own purposes all the sources of supplies, which is not without influence, even the admiration of the Commonwealth. On the other side, there is the needy and the powerless multitude, sick and sore in the spirit, and ever ready for the disturbance. If the working people can be encouraged to look forward to obtaining the share in the land, consequence will be that the gulf between the vast wealth and the sheer poverty will be abridged over. Will be bridged over, and the respective classes will be brought nearer to one another. A further consequence will result in the great abundance of the fruits of the earth. Men always work harder and more readily when they work on what belongs to them. Nay, they learn to love the very soil and yields and responds to the labor of their hands not only food to eat, but an abundance of good things for themselves and those that are dear to them. That such a spirit of willing labor would add to the purpose of the earth, and the wealth of the community is self evidence. And a third advantage would bring this that men would cling to the country in which they were born, For no one would exchange this his country for a foreign land if his own afforded him means of living a decent and happy life. These three important benefits, however, can be reckoned on only provided that man's means be not drained and exhausted by excessive taxation. Inflation, that's for sure. Uh, the rights of the rights to possess private property is deprived from the nature, not from man, and the state has the right to control its use of the interests of the public good alone, but by no means to absorb it altogether. The state would thereby be unjust and cruel if, under the name of taxation, if it would deprive the private owner of more than its fair. Boom. Mic drop right there. Mic drop right there. I mean, doesn't get any more clear than that. In the last place, employers and workmen, may of themselves affect much. In the matter we are treating by means of such associations and organizations as afford the opportune aid to those who are in distress and which drain in the two classes more closely together. Amongst these, they may be enumerated societies for mutual help, various benevolent foundations established by private persons to provide for the workmen and for its window or for its widow and its orphans. In cases of sudden calamity and sickness, in the event of death, in institutions for the welfare of boys and girls, young people, and the more advanced in years. The most important of all are working men unions, for these virtually include all the rest. History attests what excellent results were brought about by artificer guilds of olden times. They were the means of affording not only many advantages to workmen, but in no small degree of promoting the advancement of the art as numerous monuments remain to bear witness. Such unions should be suited to the requirements of this our age, an age of wider education and different habits, and far more numerous requirements in daily life. It is grafting to know that there are actually in existence not a few associations of this nature, consisting neither of the workmen alone or of the workmen or the workers together, but were greedily to be desired that they should become more numerous and more efficient. We have spoken of them more than once, and yet we will be well to explain how notable they are needed to show that they exist on their own rights and that we should have their organization and their mode of action. The consciousness of his own weakness urges man to call in aid from without. We read in the pages of Holy Writ, quote, "It is better that two should be together than one, for they have the advantage of the society. And if one shall be supported by another, or if one fall, he should be supported by another. Woe to him that is alone, for when he falleth, he hath no one to lift him up. And further, a brother that is helped by his brother is like a strong city." Unquote. It is the natural impulse which binds men together in civil society, and likewise This is which leads them to join together as associations which are, it is true, lesser and not independent societies, but nevertheless real societies. These lesser societies and larger societies differ in many respects because their immediate purpose and aim are different. Civil societies exist for the common good and hence is considered with the interests of all in general, albeit with the individual interests also in their due place and degree. It is therefore called the public society because it is by the agency, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, quote, man established relations in common with one another in the setting up of a commonwealth, unquote. But societies which are formed in the bosom of the commonwealth are styled privates, and rightly so, since their immediate purpose is the private advantage of associations. Quote, now a private society, unquote, says St. Thomas Aquinas again, quote, is one which is formed for the purpose of carrying out private objects, as when two or three enter into partnership with the viewing of trading in common, unquote. Private societies, then, although they exist with the body politic and are severely part of the Commonwealth, cannot nevertheless be absolutely and such prohibited by the public authority. For to enter into the society of this kind is the natural right of man, and the state has for its office to protect the natural rights, not to destroy them. And if it forbid its citizens to form associations, it contradicts the very principle of its own existence. For both they and it exists in the virtue of like principle, namely the natural tendency of the man to dwell in society. I think we're coming close to the end here. There are occasions, doubtless, when it is fitting that the law should intervene to prevent certain associations, as men join together for purposes which are evidently bad, unlawful, and dangerous to the state. In such cases, public authority may justly forbid the formation of such associations and may dissolve them if they already exist. But every precaution should be taken not to violate the rights of individuals and not to impose unreasonable regulations under the pretense to the public benefits. For the law only for the laws only bind when they are in accordance with right reason, and hence with the eternal law of God. And here we are reminded on the confraternities and societies and religious orders which have arisen by the church's authority and the piety of Christian man. The annals of every nation down to our own days to bear witness to what they have accomplished for the human race. It is indispensable on the grounds of reason alone, such associations being perfectly timeless in their objects, possess the sanction of the law of nature in their religious aspect. They claim rightly to be responsible to the church alone. The rulers of the state accordingly have no rights over them, nor can they claim any share in their control. On the contrary, it is the duty of the state to respect and cherish them, and if need be, to defend them from attack. It is notorious that a very different course has been followed, and more especially in our own times. In many places, the state authorities have laid violent hands on those communities and committed manifold injustices against them. and has placed them under the control of the civil law, taken away from their rights as corporal bodies, and despoiling them of their property. In such property, the church uh, had her rights. Each member of the body had his or her rights, and there were also the rights of those who had founded or endowed these communities for the definite purpose, and furthermore, those whose benefit and assistance they had their being. Therefore, we cannot refrain from complaining of such spoliation as unjust or fraught with evil results, and with all the more reason do complain, because at the very time when the law proclaims that the association is free to all, we see that the Catholic societies, however peaceful and useful, are hampered in every way, whereas the utmost liberty is conceded to individuals whose purposes are at once hurtful to religion and to dangerous to the Commonwealth. Associations of every kind, and especially those of hard working men, are now far more common than heretofore. As regards many of those, there is no need at the present to inquire. Hence, they spring what's their are objects, or what's the means they imply. Now, there is a good idea. There's good deal of evidence in favor of the opinion that many of these societies are in the hands of the secret leaders and are managed on principles ill according to Christianity and the public well-being, and what they do their utmost to get within their grasp the whole field of labor, and the force working man either to join them or to starve. Under these circumstances, Christian working men uh, must do one or two things: either join the associations in the work which their religion will be exposed to peril, or to form associations amongst themselves as to unite their forces as to shake off courageously the yoke of the unrighteous and the intolerable oppression. No one who does not wish to expose man's chief goods to extreme risk will for a moment hesitate to say that the second alternative should by all means be adopted. 55. These Catholics are worthy of all praise, and they are not a few who understand what the times require, and have striven by the various undertakings and endeavors to the better the condition of the working class by the rightful means, and they have taken up the cause of the working man, and spared no efforts to uh, the better the condition both of families and individuals, and to infuse a spirit of equity into the uh, mutual relations of employers and the employed, to keep before the eyes of the both classes the precepts and duties and the laws of the gospel. The gospel, which is in calculating self-restraint, keeps men within the bounds of moderation, intends to establish the harmony amongst the divergent interests and the various classes which compose the body politic. It is which such ends it is a view that we see men immense meeting together for the discussion, for the promotion of the concerted action, and for practical work. Others again strive to unite working men of various grades into associations, help them with their advice and means, and enable them to obtain fitting and profitable employments. The bishop, the bishops on their part bestow their ready good will be a support and their approval guidance. Many of the members of the clergy, both secular and religious, labor assiduously uh, in behalf of the spiritual interests of the members of such associations. And there are not wanting Catholics blessed uh, with affluence, who have, as it were, cast in their lot with the wage earners, who have spent large sums of founding and widely spreading benefit and insurance societies, by means of which the working man may without difficulty acquire through the labor not only many present advantages, but also the certainty of honorable support in days to come. How greatly much manifold the earnest activity has benefited the community in at large to well known inquire us to dwell upon it. We find therein grounds for most cheering hopeful the hope in the future, provided always that the associations we have described continue to grow and spread, and are well and wisely administered. The state should watch over these societies of citizens banded together in accordance with their rights, but they should not thrust themselves into their particular concerns or organizations. For things move and live by the Spirit inspiring them, and may be killed by the rough grasp of a hand from without. That makes sense. In order that the association be carried on with the unity of the purpose and the harmony of action, the administration and the government a firm and wise should be firm and wise, as all such societies, being free to exist, have the further right to adopt such rules and organizations as may best conduce to the attainment of their respective objects. We do not judge it possible to enter into a minute particulars touching the subject of organization. This must depend on national character, or the practice or experience, on the nature and the aim of the work is to be done, on the scope of the various trades and the employments, and of the other circumstances of in fact and of the time, of all which should be carefully considered. To sum up, we have to lay it down as the general and the lasting law that the working men's association should be so organized and governed as to be furnished the best and the most suitable means for obtaining what that was aimed at, and that is to say, for the helping each other in each individual member, for the betterment of his condition, and the utmost in body, soul, and property. It is clear that they must pay special and chief attention to the duties of religion and morality, and the social betterment should have this chiefly in view. Otherwise, they would lose wholly their special character and end by becoming little better than these those societies which take no account whatever in religion. What advantage can it be to working man by obtained by means of a society material well-being, if it endangers his soul for the lack of spiritual food? What doth it profit a man if he gain the whole world and suffer the loss of his own soul? This, as our Lord teaches, is the mark of a character that distinguishes the Christian from the heathen. Quote, after all these things, do the heathen seek. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his justice, and all things shall be added to you. Unquote. Let our associations then look first and before all things to God, and let the religion instruction have therein the foremost place, each being carefully taught what has been duly to God, what has been believed, what has to be believed, and what is to hope for, and what he has to work out his salvation. And let all be warned and strengthened with the special care against wrong principles and false teachings. Let the working man be urged and led to worship of God in the earnest practice of religion, and amongst other things to keep holy of Sundays and holy days. Let him learn to observe and love the Holy Church, the common mother of us all, and hence to obey the precepts of the Church and to frequent the sacraments, since they are the means ordained by God for obtaining forgiveness of sin and leading a holy life. The foundation of the organization being thus laid in the religion, we next proceed to make clear the relations of the members of one another, in order that they may live together in concord and go forward and prosperously and with good results, and the offices and the charges in the society should be apportioned for the good of the society itself, and in much mode the difference in degree and standing should not interfere with the unanimity and goodwill. It, it is most important that the office bearers be appointed with due prudence and discretion, and each one's charge carefully mapped out in order that no members may suffer harm. And the common funds must be administered with the strict honesty in such a way that a member may receive assistance in proportion to the necessities, the rights and the duties and the employers as compared with the rights and the duties of the employed ought to be subject to careful consideration. Should it happen that either a master or workman behaves himself injured, nothing would be more desirable than a committee should be appointed, composed of reliable and capable members of an association. Holy duty would be comfortable with the rules of the association to settle the dispute amongst the several purposes of society. One should be try to arrange for the continuous supply of work at all times and seasons, as well as to create a fund out of which the numbers may be effectively helped in their needs, not only in the case of accidents, but also in sickness, old age, and distress. Such rules and regulations, if willingly obeyed by all, will sufficiently ensure the well being of the less well to do, while uh, such mutual associations amongst Catholics are certain to be productive in no small degree of prosperity to the state. It is not rash to conjecture the future from the past. Age gives way to age, but the events of one century are wonderfully like those of another, for they are directed by the providence of God, who overrules the course of history in accordance with the purposes in creating the race of men, We are told that if it was cast as the reproach on the Christians in the early ages of the church, that the greater number amongst them had to live by the begging or by the labor. Yet, destitute though they were of the wealth and the influence, they ended up by winning over their side the favor of the rich and the goodwill of the powerful. They showed themselves industrious, hardworking, studious, and peaceful, ruled by justice, and above all, bound together in brotherly love. In the presence of such mode of life and such example, prejudice gave way, and the tongue of maleficence was silenced. And the lying legends of the ancient superstition, little by little, yielded to Christian truth. At that time, being the condition of the working classes at the pressing question of the how of the hour, and nothing can be of the higher interest to all the classes of the states then that it should be to rightly and reasonably settled. But it will be easy for the Christian working men to solve it aright if they will form associations, choose wise guides, and follow the path which, with so much advantage to themselves and the common weal, was trodden by their fathers before them. Prejudice, it is true, is mighty, and so is the greed of money, but in the sense of what it was the just and rightful, be not uh, deliberately stifled. Their fellow citizens are sure to be won over by the kindly feeling towards men whom they see to be in earnest as regard their work, and who prefer so unmistakable right dealing as the mere lure and the sacredness of the duty to every other consideration. And for the great advantage would result from the state of things we are describing, there would be and exist so much more ground for hope and likelihood even of recalling a sense of their duty to those working men who have neither given up their faith altogether or whose lives are at variance with its precepts. Such men feel in the most cases that they have been fooled by empty promises and deceived by false pretexts. They cannot but perceive their grasping employers too often treat them with great inhumanity and hardly care for them outside the profit of their labor brings. And they that belong to any union, it is probably one in which there exists, instead of the charity and love, that intestinate strife which ever accompanies poverty when unreined or unresigned and unrestrained by religion, broken in spirit and worn down in the body. How many of them would gladly free themselves from such galling bondage? But human respect or the dread of starvation makes them tremble to take the step. To such of these Catholic associations are the incalculable service by helping them out of their difficulties, inviting them to the championship or the companionship, and receiving and returning wanderers to the haven where they may securely find repose. We have now laid rest before you, venerable brethren, both who are the persons and what are the means whereby the most arduous question must be solved. Every one should put in his hand to work which falls to his share, and at once uh, and straightway, lest the evil which is already so great become through delay absolutely beyond remedy. Those who rule the Commonwealth should avail themselves of the laws instituted of the country, and the masters and the wealthy owners must be mindful of their duty, and the working class, whose interests are at stake, should make every lawful and proper effort. And since religion alone, as we have said at the beginning, can avail to destroy the evil at the roots, all men should rest persuaded. The main thing needful is to reestablish Christian morals, apart from which all the plans and devices of the wisest will prove the little avail. And here we come to the conclusion very shortly. In regard to the church, then her cooperation will never be found lacking, be the time or the occasion what it may, and she will intervene with the greater effects in proportion as her liberty of her action is more unfettered. Let this be carefully taken to the heart by those whose office it is to safeguard the public welfare. Every minister of holy religion must bring the full energy of this of his mind and of his power of endurance, moved by the authority, venerable brethren, and quickened by your example. They should never cease to urge upon men, every class, upon the high place as well as the lowly, the gospel doctrine of Christian life. By every means, in their power, they must strive to secure the goods of the people, and above all, must earnestly cherish in themselves, and try to arouse in others charity in the mistress and the queen of virtues. For the happy results we all long for must be chiefly brought about by plenteous outpouring of charity, of the true Christian charity, which is the fulfilling of the whole gospel law, which is always ready to sacrifice itself for others' sake. And for man's surest antidote against the worldly pride and the immoderate love of self, that charity whose office is described in the chief godlike features are outlined by the apostle St. Paul in his words, quotes, charity is patient, is kind, seeketh not her own, suffereth all things, endureth all things, unquotes. On each of you, venerable brethren, and your clergy and people, as the earnest of God and mercy and mark of our affection, we lovingly in the Lord bestow apostolic benediction. Given at St. Peter's in Rome, the 15th of May 1891, in the 14th year of our pontificate, Pope Leo the 13th. There we go. That was a long one, but that is arguably probably Pope Leo the 13th's most famous encyclical that he published. There's a few more that talk about uh, order and rights and things like that. But that one was probably the most famous one he wrote, and was a response toward communism too, which was taking off rampantly in the dialogues of 1800s Europe, basically, and kind of springing up in the university systems, which led into the 20th century. Uh, let's just say
denigration of society. So, anyway, I hope you guys found that useful. God bless. And next week, Pope Leo the 14th encyclical comes out, which is arguably kind of a continuation of this, just 135 years later. Is arguably a sequel to Rerum Novarum. So, looking forward to that. It's probably going to be a long one. I predict it's going to be a long one, just because most post Vatican II conciliar encyclicals are pretty long, especially coming from Francis. Benedict and JB2 had some short ones here and there, but Francis just kind of went, just like, it's like, might as well be a book. Um, so, encyclical that Leo is going to release next week. We'll see how long it is. We'll see if we can do it maybe in bite sizes, or maybe we can power through it like I did today. Um, Hopefully it's useful. So, anyway, God bless. Peace.